All right. So,
This is an interview with CW04 Jack Lauer. Mr. Lauer was born on January 13th, 1947 in Oakland, California. Mr. Lauer served from February 1964 to October of 1994 in the submarine service, serving in the Pacific Ocean and the Sea of Japan. Mr. Lauer achieved the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4. This interview is being done on November 30th, 2013 in Davis, California at the campus of Da Vinci High School. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress as part of Da Vinci High School's America at War project.
Well, kind of a little history on that. My father was a merchant marine in World War II, serving in the Pacific Ocean, and from his experiences and growing up with him, he would tell stories about the war, and so I got interested in, as all boys do, mostly in the military. War, where it's sort of ingrained into the male, and he had friends in Oakland, California. He was born in Oakland, California. I was born in Oakland, California, and one of his friends worked for the Oakland Police Department, and he was a submarine veteran of World War II, and he served in the Pacific Ocean. And when he got out of the service, became an Oakland Police Department detective. And he also stayed in the Navy Reserve as a recruiter. So my father and him, knowing each other, decided, I guess between them, when I turned 17, that I was going to join the submarine service. And coincidentally, my next door neighbor, a guy who was 2 years older than me, which I used to hang out with and play sports with, he went into the Navy and actually was on submarine service. So when he came back on leave, I would talk to him about it, and seemed pretty interesting. So in February, when I turned 17, I was herded over to the Alameda Navy Reserve Station, and I was signing these papers. And now, my sister's boyfriend was also in the National Guard at that time, and he was just drilling with once a month. And so I kind of knew a little bit about the reserve program, just listening to it. And I'm still in high school. I was in 11th grade. So February, I'm standing at attention at this my first meeting, and I was kind of thinking that this was, sort of like a temporary job. It wasn't, no one's really telling me I had to go 2 years of active duty at the time. And so the next thing I know, I'm going to submarine school at Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, which is right across the way, San Francisco Bay. It used to have a submarine base there. And I'm going to submarine school. I'm reporting there and for 6 weeks. And at times I could look out the window and I could almost see where I lived. So here I am, 17 years old. I'm dressed up in my Navy uniform, and I'm learning about submarines, how to, 6 weeks did that. That was my summer vacation. Most of you students, I know what you do on summer vacation. You're out having fun, not worrying about school, but I was in this class 8 hours a day learning about how a submarine works. So after that, I went back to high school, but I drilled on weekends. Once a month, I had to get my uniform on, go to Alameda, and drill. And I started listening to you're hanging around Navy people, officers that are reserves, and this is and we also worked on submarines. There was a submarine that was actually deactivated, but it was a training vehicle, and it was parked right there in the estuary. I don't know if you're familiar with Oakland. There's an estuary that goes between Alameda and Oakland, and there was 2 reserve boats. One was a destroyer escort, and one was a submarine. So we'd go down in the submarine, do our drill for 2 days, and then I'd go back to school on Monday. And then I graduated from Oakland High School. I had pretty good grades, and I thought about going to college, but I had this 2 years of active duty. Now, I'll stop you right there with my story, but thinking back about what was going on in the world at that time. After World War II, there was that threat of communism. The Soviet Union and the Allies, Roosevelt, Stalin, Churchill met in Germany and kind of, and they met many times and kind of formulated what was going to happen after World War II about how they restored Germany. And I'm sure they met about Japan also, about how Japan would fit in after the war was over. Well, Russia went one direction and the Allies went the other. You had this loggerhead against each other. Communism was a threat. Now as a kid, I was born in '47, so the war was over. I'm growing up. There was a Korean War. I vaguely remember something about that. I saw movies just like you see on TV now. And but you're sitting, in grammar school, sitting in your chair, and you've got this procedure where you have to get under the desk because you're going to be blown up by the Russians. So as a kid, you've got that, not knowing what's going on in the world because you're in the 6th grade or 5th grade or 3rd grade, but there's an enemy out there wanting to blow you up. So as you progress, you get older. As a teenager, you're reading about it. Then there was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember sitting in my dentist chair, and the dentist was turning up the radio to listen to John F. Kennedy talk about what they're going to do to stop the threat in Cuba. Now, the Russians had transported missiles, maybe nuclear missiles, to Cuba, which was 90 miles from our shore, aiming at our country. Well, our government wouldn't put up with that, so we blockaded Cuba and we're ready to go in and invade Cuba. So now as a kid, you're noticing that you have this enemy, the Russians, the Soviet Union, the Cold War. They're trying to take us over. In 1963, I think it was, 62, Khrushchev at the UN was sitting there pounding his shoe, pointing at us saying, "We will bury you." So their intent was to bury it. We weren't telling that to the world. We weren't saying, "We're going to bury you," but he was. So I saw that as a kid. So, and then the Vietnam crisis started. I remember in high school, there was an incident that got us deeper into the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin. There was a ship, I don't remember exactly the name of the ship, but they fired on us and then we fired back, and that kind of was the point that I remember that that was going to cause us to go deeper into the war. And again, it was communism that we were supposedly fighting, and we don't want communism spreading throughout the world. So having the experience of, or listening to the experience of my father fighting tyranny, listening to the officers in my reserve unit who were very well educated, I believed them about, service to the country. My father did it. Why can't I? And so that there I was right in the midst of it. Now, out of high school, getting back on track, I could have deferred and went to college. I knew I had 2 years of active duty to do. I said, you know what? I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get that 2 years out of the way. And so right out of high school, I went to San Diego, went to submarine sonar school, and that was about a 12-week course. Then they flew me to Hawaii to my first submarine. And as a submariner, you are a submarine in in that day and age, in World War II, a submarine was used to sink cargo ships and warships. In the 60s, submarines were basically used to gather intelligence, to drop like Navy SEALs off secretly into islands or whatever, and also their primary importance was to their primary importance was anti-submarine warfare, is to fight other submarines underwater. So although we had the capabilities of shooting other warships, our main job was to track and to destroy enemy submarines. Of course, Vietnam didn't have any enemy submarines, so we were basically out there to keep track of the Russians, the Soviet Union, and the Communist Chinese. I believe they had a few submarines. So what do we do on a submarine? All right. The first submarine that I went on was a diesel submarine. This was a World War II submarine that they modified. Most of the ships in the Navy go through overhauls all the time. So this ship was built in maybe 1944 and saw some limited action in World War II. But over those 20 or 30 years, they keep remodeling it. Still the same. It'd be like having your Volkswagen and they do a paint job on it and they put new seat covers on and put a new engine in it. And they do some modifications. So now here I report to the submarine in Pearl Harbor, and it's already 25 years old. So it's not modern. It's very cramped. There's maybe 90 people on this submarine that's 312 feet long. And you sleep in a bed that is about this long, a little bit longer than this, and you have about that much space between you and the next bed above you, and it would be lined up 3 high in the compartment. And unfortunately, junior men, there's not enough beds to go around, so you had to hot bunk, which means that when you're on watch, somebody else is sleeping in your bed. And then when you got off watch, you came down and hopefully the guy was gone and you get to go into your bed. As far as hygiene goes, there was no washing machine on the ship, so you had to wear whatever clothes you had that you could pack in your little 12 by 12 by 12 space. So it'd be like maybe you'd have 2 sets of clothes and you would wear that for long periods of time. Matter of fact, some guys would say that, hey, I saw your sock crawling back to the after battery, is that yours? Sort of like it's infested with, whatever is on board the ship. You had, for these 70 people, you had maybe 3 commodes, and in one room we had what they called was the after battery. Incidentally, if you ever want to see a World War II submarine, there's one in San Francisco. It's called the Pompano, and get a chance to walk through that, you'll see what I'm talking about. Although you're seeing when everything is ripped out and there's really a lot more space, but it's a lot more cramped than that even. Used to sleep next to torpedoes, because in the forward torpedo room, the after torpedo room, they would carry 16 torpedoes in the forward and 14 aft, or 10 aft, and you could load 4 of them, or 6 forward, and the rest of the spare ones were in the room. So you would be bunked up next to a torpedo, which was all greasy because it slides into the torpedo tube. And so do you take a shower? No, because all the water that the ship made was used for watering the batteries and for cooking. So I remember when I first reported on board the ship, the person who took care of the water, that had the stills, he would say, if I catch you combing your hair, you will be working with me on the stills. Now the stills is a very lousy watch because it's very hot, And they take seawater, convert it into fresh water. And to do that, you had to use heat. And where these stills were was a very hot space. And so you'd be sweating and getting your clothes even worse. So you didn't comb your hair. You didn't wash your clothes. And imagine 76 people living in a space like this for 45 days. And so now, fortunately for me, there was other submarines out there that were nuclear powered. They were built in the 60s. Like the Nautilus was our first nuclear power submarine. Nuclear power there was an admiral named Jaime Rickover who was the father of nuclear power in the Navy. And they decided to build submarines with nuclear power, which gave it and they built them bigger, and they had better technology. And sort of like, the cell phones, you start off with a real cheap cell phone. Now you got the iPhone. Well, that's what like the first cell phone is like the diesel submarine, and then the iPhone is your nuclear power submarine. Fortunately for me, there was an injury occurred on a Polaris submarine. A Polaris submarine is in those days was 425 feet long, 30 feet in diameter, and it had a crew of 128 people, and it had air conditioning, and you got your own bunk, and there was a lot of room, and it was new. And I got transferred to that because I was a sonarman, and I had a secret clearance, and someone got injured before their patrol, and they needed somebody to fill in for that guy. So I got transferred to that submarine, and I remember going on to it. Now, backing up a little bit, if you didn't know this, this submarine, what they call a ballistic submarine, carried 16 nuclear or not atom bombs, but atomic bombs. And their mission was to go out in the middle of the ocean and hide and wait for a signal from the White House or from the command center to blow up the world. There's a submarine out there right now doing that same thing, if you didn't know that. I remember talking to a guy that was much younger than me, and he had never heard of that, didn't realize that our government, our military has submarines out there waiting to blow up the world. So I was transferred to this submarine, and I remember going on it. It was home ported in Guam. The training center was in Ford Island, Hawaii, which is in the middle of Hawaiian Islands. It's right in the middle of Pearl Harbor. There's another island out there called Ford Island. So then you go out there and you train, and then they send you down to this other island, and there's two crews on the ship, the blue and the gold. The blue crew, I was on the blue crew. When I reported, the gold crew had the submarine out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. I didn't know where that submarine was. No one knows where that submarine was other than a few people. It's very, very secretive. We don't want the Russians to know where we were or the world to know. So we fly down to Guam, and we don't know when the submarine's coming in because they don't want anybody to know that it's getting close. So sometimes you'd wait 3 weeks for it, sometimes you'd wait a week for it to come back in. So it comes in, you flip crews, and the blue crew gets a little training, take the submarine out for a day or two, come back in, fix all the things that are broken, right? She's an English teacher, so I got to be around. Then we head out on our patrol. And they don't tell you how long you're going to be gone, and they don't tell you where they're going. So you leave port, and now imagine you have 120 people doing their jobs. You have engineers, you have technicians fixing things, you have cooks cooking meals 3 times a day, actually 4 times a day. You have a hospital corpsman, we had a doctor, we had missile technicians. We have any job you can really think of, basically the Navy has. Torpedo men, But now this is a brand new big ship. It's all new, and they take really good care of it. I had my own bunk. They actually had a Coke machine on board. Had movies every night. We'd load, in those days the movies were regular, 3 reels. And so you'd have to load all these movies on board. And the guys would be looking at, I've seen that one before. I don't want to see a Western. Oh, good, we have a Western. So you got that. And, somebody in charge of those movies would pick what was playing. And, people would argue with them about, well, I already seen, can't you show this one tonight? That kind of thing goes on. And so now you go out, and the first time I went out on this submarine, we were underwater for 67 days. So what you do, and I think that's one of your questions, is you do your job for 67 days. Now, part of my job, I was young, I was like 18 or 19 at that time, was I mess cooked. Mess cook is you're working for the cook. And the cook they have 4 cooks. And now my job, along with 2 other guys, was to serve these 128 people. And so it becomes a routine. You get up at like 5:30 in the morning. You set the tables. There were 6 tables. That means 24 people. There's 4 at a table, so that's 24 people could eat at one time. So the cook prepares the food, and we serve it family style. That means, like, if he's cooking bacon and eggs, I'd get the order for the guys, say, all my eggs over medium, and I'd like just like a restaurant. And I'm serving these guys that I don't necessarily like all of them, and they don't leave tips. And so you work from like 5 in the morning till about 8 at night doing that job. And then you got to clean up everything after everybody eats, because it's sanitary nuclear power submarine. Now there's that worry about the nuclear reactor giving off radiation. Well, I can tell you that the ship was built so well, the nuclear power submarines, that you get more radiations being out in the sun or out in the earth, outside. They check you. We used to have a film badge, and they would take your film badge to see if you got any radiation during the month, and they would keep track of that. They log it. Now, the people working in the reactor compartment, very rarely did they ever go into the reactor compartment. It's self-contained. They'd open a door if they had a leak or something. They would go. One guy would go down there, and they would check with the dosimeter, and come back out, and they'd log it. But no one ever got sick or anything from the nuclear power. Okay, so now imagine this. You're out in the middle of the ocean, 67 days. So why are you there? You're there as a deterrent, because the Russians had the same thing going too. They had nuclear submarines with missiles on it. And so so you're going along every day. It's a routine. You do the same thing over and over again. I didn't do mess cooking for 67 days. I was also a planes watch, where you control the depth of the ship and steer it, of course. Like in the control room, the officer of the deck would say, come to course 270. So I'd come to course 270, aye, sir. And you steer the course, make your depth 400 feet, sir. So you can go down to 400 feet. And so that was my second job in the Navy. Now, occasionally, we used to drag this wire, and that wire was an antenna that would be about 120 feet long, and that wire would receive messages from headquarters. Once in a while, they would send out a message saying, shoot your missiles, but it would be a drill. This to test that you are getting the message. So when you come back into port, we never communicated with anybody because it would give itself away. They knew where basically we were because they told us to go to a certain location and patrol in this area. But generally, they knew where you were. They didn't know exactly where you were. So if you had an accident or if you sunk, they could kind of go to that area and say, the ship went down here. Incidentally, the USS Scorpion sank in 1968 in 10,000 feet of water. and it took them a couple months to find them. Everyone was killed, of course. So that's the kind of the danger in submarines, is that they don't know where you are. They know when you're supposed to come back, so they're waiting for you at the pier, but they don't, and if you don't show up, uh-oh. So that's the kind of life you live, kind of secretive life. But anyway, so now they do these drills, and the message comes across, go to battle stations, missile. So now my job was to go to the forward torpedo room and help load torpedoes if something else happened. Now everybody else has a job. The missile techs would go to the missile room, the commanding officer would go to the missile control center, and they have keys, you've seen in movies where they unlock the thing. And so now you're sitting there, and they don't tell you that it's a drill. So now, oh crap, is this really going to happen? Are we going to shoot our missiles and blow up the world? When I say blow up the world, I'm saying blowing up Russia. Because they've done something to us, and you don't get any news, or you're underwater and you don't know what's going on in the world, so you're kind of trusting the messages coming in that it's accurate. No. So that was that submarine. And when I got into port and flew back to Hawaii, they transferred me off that ship because I wasn't an obligor. I was just a substitute for that patrol. So they transferred me to the USS Swordfish, and that was a submarine I spent 2 years on. Now, this is a different type of submarine. That was a fast attack submarine. Didn't have missiles, just had torpedoes. And our job was more into intelligence gathering and following submarines around, Russian submarines. So I don't know if you, in your studies, you might have, 1968, I think it was, the USS Pueblo was captured by the North Koreans. And we were in Hawaii. And what the USS Pueblo was an intelligence gathering ship. It was described to the world as a oceanographic vessel that goes out to get whatever oceanographic vessels get, depth of the water, sea temperature, whatever. But they were actually spying on, with antennas and listening to what the North Koreans are doing, listening to what the Russians are doing, that kind of thing. They always stay outside the international waters. Like North Korea has a 12-mile limit, United States has a 3-mile limit. So whenever you get in within 3 miles of our coast, we're going to go ask you why you're there. Now the Russians and North Koreans probably don't ask, they just go out and get you. So we always had to stay out 12 miles. And I'm told that the Pueblo was outside the 12-mile limit. The North Koreans didn't like us there. They captured the vessel and held that group of people. One person got killed. The commanding officer and the rest of his crew was held in North Korea for maybe a year. They're just in jail, trying to get intelligence gathering. And of course, the North Koreans wanted to gather what kind of gear we had, because that's, secret gear or listening devices. So the guys were destroying it, blowing it up before they, facilitated the capture. So now I'm in Hawaii. We're getting ready. We were going to go on patrol in a month, and they bumped us up to leave to go over there because they thought it would be a conflict going on with what happened. Well, it turned out that they said, no, we don't need you over there. But eventually we went over there and operated underwater off the coast of North Korea, spying on them. Now, there's a good book, if you're ever interested in reading about submarine missions. It's called Blindsman Bluff. And I'll give you a preview of some of the mission, or one of the missions that happened against the Russian. If you look on a map, Vladivostok is one of the big ports on the Sea of Japan, the Russians. And there's another submarine base north. The Russians have a submarine base north of that, and I want to say Petropavlovsky or something like that. Don't but they're about 200 or 300 miles apart. Sort of like be San Diego and San Francisco. We knew, for some reason, that they had a underground cable that they communicated from one base to another that went under the water. Not underground, but underwater cable. So somebody in Washington had this idea that maybe if we found that cable, we could tap into it and listen to what they're saying, because it's not encrypted. It's just like a regular telephone line. Hi, this is Commander Boris. He's talking to his counterpart up, and maybe they got some secret information that they're talking about. Now, intelligence is very important to know what the enemy, the so-called enemy's doing, so you can kind of be ready for anything that they do. So we want to know what kind of weapons they have. We want to know how deep their submarines can go. We want to know how fast their planes can fly, all that kind of stuff. We want to know what kind of machine guns they have, what they're planning, so the job, part of our job in the submarines was to gather that information. This is being gathered by satellite, by spies, by submarine intelligence, by that ship that got captured. That's happening today. If you don't think it is happening. Just like we had that the NSA spying. It's been going on for years. People spy on. They're not listening to your cell phone. They're listening to certain things that are out there that are to do with gathering intelligence. So one of the missions was to find this cable. So the submarine service developed submarines that had cameras underneath with lights, and they had a submarine called the USS Halibut that had a big bulbous bow that they made into a tank where they could put divers, and another submarine that had certain characteristics about it, with a camera and other things. So we're searching for this cable. So how do you think we found a cable underwater? One of the things, backing up a little bit, they installed this camera and the slider on our submarine, and then they threw a car into the ocean right off the coast of Maui, and we had to go find it. And we found it. They give us a general location where it is and drive around. Oh, there it is. Took us a little while, but we found this car. I forget what kind of car it was. Probably a Packard or old car. So now, this is very hush-hush even on the submarine. They're not telling us what we're doing. They didn't tell me that they're going to do this. They didn't say, Jack, you think it'd be all right if we did this? So I'm just a sonarman on the submarine. I'm listening to what's out there in the ocean. When we're driving along at 300, 400, 500 feet, I'm listening what's in front of us so we don't hit anything. We don't send out a signal because it gives you away, so it's mostly sound that we're listening to. You can hear a ship 120 miles away. You can hear submarines coming up. You understand, or you can listen, or you're trained to listen to what the biologics in the ocean. Like if it's a tanker ship, a warship, submarine, you catalog that in your mind and you listen to them. They make tapes of it so you kind of know what's out there. And you inform the commanding officers and the officer of the deck, hey, I got a surface ship bearing 270, it's traveling at 10 knots and it's going this way. You do all that stuff. So now we're going over there trying to find this cable, but they're not telling me we're trying to find the cable. You can't hear a cable. So my particular submarine didn't find the cable, but another one did. And the way they did that is they raised the periscope and they're looking right off the coast of Russia, and there is a sign written in Russian, cable crossing, do not anchor. Just like you see if you ever go out on a ship in the Bay Area, there's cables that go underwater between San Francisco and Oakland and whatever. They have signs on the shore. It says, don't anchor here because if you'll break the cable if you drop the anchor on it. So they go, that's where it is. So then they send this other ship, the one with the bulbous bow, the USS Halibut, right where the cable is. Open up the hatch, the divers go down, it's like 300 feet deep, and they attach a listening device on this cable. It was I used to work for AT&T. They put an AT&T listening device on the cable. Didn't cut the cable or anything, but they just put it on there. Had tapes, recorded information, and divers come back. Submarine leaves. 6 months later, 3 months later, they come back, put new tapes in, take the other ones out, send the tapes back to Washington, some secret agency, CIA, listen to, see what they can gather some intelligence. So that was one of the missions that submarines do. And I bet they're still doing stuff like that today. What happened with that one was that there was a mole in the CIA that told the Russians that we were doing this. And then the word got out, you might have saw it in the paper, that we were spying on the Russians with this listening device. And they were really upset at us because we did that. Because we violated their 12-mile limit and went in and dropped this listening device on there. Now this is all happening while Vietnam is going on. I'm not involved with Vietnam. I'm involved with spying on the Russians, because that's our enemy. One of our enemies. Communism. North Korea, China, the North Vietnam. So that's basically what I did. We never shot a torpedo at anybody to blow up a ship. We never shot anybody from the submarine because it's pretty hard to hit people underwater to shoot through the hull. We did get close to other ships. They went over the top of us. We're down 100 feet, 200 feet, and we'd be at periscope depth. And oh crap, we got to lower our scope and get down because maybe they saw us. So you hide. Is it exciting? Yeah, it's a little exciting. It gets the heart going sometimes. No one was shooting at us, fortunately. Never got depth charged. We did bounce off the bottom one time. I'll never forget that. That was a mistake one of the officers made. We also bent our periscope off the coast of Russia. We hit a buoy. The captain said it was an iceberg, but it wasn't an iceberg. It was a buoy because I heard it going down the side of the hull because the sonarman. We record everything that we're listening to. You could hear the chain. The buoys are anchored by chains out there. You go out, they just don't float around out there. So imagine coming into Japan with this bent periscope. When we got done with our mission, we'd go into Yokosuka, Japan. Now the Japanese didn't like nuclear power. We all know why. So here comes a nuclear power submarine. They let us enter the port, and we got a bent periscope. So how in the heck did we get a bent periscope? You can't tell them. So as sailors get off the ship and go into town, and a lot of them go to bars, of course, because they've been out to sea for 45 days and they need to drink or whatever, and there's girls in the bar and they're asking, says, "Oh, you got bent periscope." And how'd you get a bent periscope? Because it's on TV, and I remember one guy says, "We got hit by a bus." And they go, "Oh, they got hit by a bus." And that was, those are the type of things that happen in wartime, I guess. Now, the mission that we did in Vietnam. Now, this is sort of a boondoggle. Submarine officers and enlisted men get submarine pay. It's extra money for being in the submarine service. And the staff officers, the ones that have been on submarines, but they get transferred off submarine to do work like the administrators you have in school. They're not facing the students. Well, in order for them to get their sub pay, they have to ride on a submarine for 48 hours a month. So if you're over in Hawaii, stationed there, you'll take a submarine out for local ops for a couple of days, come back in, and you get your sub pay. Only officers do this. So they programmed our submarine to pick up a number of officers that were in Okinawa and to take them out for 2 months, but 2 days on one side of the month and 2 days, 29th and 30th and the 1st and the 2nd. So they get their 2 months of submarine pay. Of course, they had to stay on a little bit longer than that. But guess where we went? Picked them up in Okinawa. Where do you think we went? We went to Vietnam because it was tax-free in the war zone. So not only did they get their sub pay for 2 months, they also got tax-free money because they were in the war zone. And I bet they got to wear their Vietnam service ribbon for being in the war zone. So we picked up these people. Now, of course, they're all higher ranking officers, and they have to sleep somewhere, and we don't have a spare bedroom for them. So they bump all the lower junior officers out of their bunks, who then in turn bump all the enlisted guys out of their bunks. So then we had to hot bunk again while we're doing this. So we went to Vietnam, and our mission was to look at the ships that were coming. There's an island called Hainan Island, and there's a channel that goes behind the island and down into Haiphong, which is the harbor where the North Vietnamese would get their supplies. There's a big city. And so we were just cataloging these ships, going, yep, he looks like he's going there. No, there's a Russian ship going there. And that's what our job was. I mean, they had aircraft flying around. They didn't need us there. But you know why we were there. But we got tax-free money, and the guys got their sub pay. And then we dropped them off into in the Philippines, and then they flew back to Okinawa. So that was my Vietnam experience. Now, then we headed back to go spy on people again. So what else can I tell you? When I took liberty, or when I took leave, come back home for a while, the people I went to high school, my friends, many of them, or a lot of them, didn't go in the service. They went to college, junior college. And as long as they avoided, then there was a lottery where your name was pulled out of, or your number was pulled out of a hat, and you could be drafted. So all my friends were sweating of being drafted. They didn't want to go to Vietnam. I don't know if any of my friends were protesting or anything like that, but they were hanging low. They were making sure they stayed in school, whether they wanted to be in school or not, because there was a deferment up to a certain point. And so I'd come back in my uniform. They probably thought I was a dummy for going in the service, but I looked at them and I sort of like, well, I had that feeling of wanting to serve my country. They were avoiding it. Now, looking back on it now, the Vietnam War was a waste. We didn't accomplish anything. We lost 50,000 people. But at that time, you believe in your leaders. I believed in my leaders. I thought there was a problem. Now, smarter people like my wife, who was in college, probably knew that that wasn't the right path to go. But I had to believe the educated people, the commanding officers, the officers who went to Annapolis that had a much better education than me. They were out there. Why can't I be? That's the reason I'm there, because I had that feeling of trust in my government. And I wouldn't say that I was wanting to protect my family and stuff like that. I don't think so. I was more of like the experience, young, being in the submarine. I was kind of proud of that duty. Not many people can do that, so that was my experience. Now, when I got out of my 3 years active duty, actually I only was supposed to go 2 years, but I extended because I was enjoying it. There was a time where when I was in the Vietnam waters, they asked me to ship over. It means to extend to go United States Navy full time. and they were going to give me $10,000 to do that, and I had to weigh that. It was a bonus. 6 years, $10,000. I had to think tax-free because we were in the war zone. Imagine having $10,000. Nowadays, $10,000 is nothing. But then in 1960, what I looked at is there was guys that did ship over, and they went and bought a Corvette, and then the car broke, and then they threw away their $10,000. So I thought about, God, what am I going to do with $10,000? I'm not smart enough for all that money, and so I didn't ship over. But I did stay in the Navy Reserve, and I drilled for another 28 years. And you probably know that during the Iraq War, Afghanistan, that they called up the reserves to go fight there. And I almost got called up in the first Gulf War, but they didn't need us as a submarine repair person at that time. And I can tell you that the career, the military is, at least in my experience, submarines, the people in the submarine community are above and beyond, they're smart people. These officers had to go, they went to nuclear power school. They're physicists, they're engineers, they're highly educated, and they're smart. And when you're driving a submarine around the ocean responsible for nuclear weapons with a nuclear power plant and 150 people and that ship, it's quite a job. They don't get paid enough. And so I had a great career. I still would be drilling if I could today, but they didn't need me anymore. They just booted me out because I was, when the wall went down in Berlin, Russia lost. They couldn't pay. We outspent them, basically. They couldn't build submarines anymore and run their country. Matter of fact, some of the intelligence we got were that in Latvia and Lithuania, the Russians had a fleet there in the Black Sea, that when they couldn't afford to pay the sailors and pay to live there, so they had to move out of their houses and live on board the ship. With their families were living on board the ship. These are warships now, because the government couldn't pay the local government the money for the rent and stuff, and so basically they just went bankrupt, and we won the Cold War, basically, because of people like me staying in there, always ready to go to war, basically, or to defend our country. And at least that's what it was told to me. That's what a reservist basically is, like twice a citizen. Somebody said that. I can't remember his name, but our forefathers, one of them said that be a reservist is to be twice a citizen. So I always kind of look at that as an honorable thing. Silly things.
Okay.
All right. You meet many different people on the submarines. There's different personalities, just like in your classroom. There's guys that are real serious. There's guys that are funny. And trying to think of some of the things that we did. Like, for instance, when you're out at sea, you got a new guy on board. Say you got some new people just come on board, and I'll give you this better story. We were out at sea, and these two guys, two old timers, they were probably in their 30s, old timers. One was a supply guy, another one was a torpedoman. His name was Rogovin and Addis. They both slept in the forward torpedo room. And they would be playing cards at the table when they're not on watch, pinochle or whatever. And they were talking to each other about the sea bat that got into the forward torpedo room during our last port stay, and they couldn't catch it. the sea bats flying around. So, it would talk about it in a way that other people walking by would hear them. And, like, I even heard it. I'm a young guy. I'm saying, sea bat? What the hell is a sea bat? So, about a week later, the executive officer, now this is a person you believe in on board the ship. Now, again, you're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. There's no newspapers to read or anything. He comes on and he says, for the information of all hands, Rogovin and Addis in the forward torpedo room have captured the sea bat. Anybody wanting to see the sea bat, please come to the forward torpedo room and, wait. You'll be able to see it before we discard it overboard. We had our garbage on a submarine. We used to dump it through a inverted torpedo tube. You throw the garbage in there and then would shoot it down. It's a long story. Anyway, so I'm sitting on watch, and I got this guy from New York, I think his name was Cornell, and he was kind of, there's no such thing as a sea bat, and I'm sitting there going, I kind of knew that, but I still wasn't sure. I said, well, the executive officer isn't. Luckily, I had the watch, so I couldn't get up and go down. But he was like off watch, and so he goes. I was kind of talking up. I said, now would the executive officers say that if there wasn't a sea bat? I mean, what? I'm still doubting it, but I wanted him to go. So he left. He said, no, there's no, well, what, you got, so he left, and he comes back about 10 minutes later, he's all pissed off. God damn. What they did is they lined people up on the hatch, the door, and we only allow one person at a time because it might get away, and so they said, okay, it's in there, you gotta bend over, and they hit you with a bat in your butt, like, so if you're gullible enough to be down there, he was all, luckily I had to watch because I knew I would have been in that line. But we do think, that they do hazing like that in the submarines. A lot of different stories. We used to, when you're just leaving port, we used to have a phone in port outside line so you could make calls. You had to get permission to use a phone, but you could use it. People calling in an emergency would ring and stuff. So, of course, when you're getting underway, when you're leaving, you disconnect the phone, but the phone still stays on the table there. So maybe halfway out the port, people would get on the line and say, hey, Jones, you got an outside phone call in control room. So the guy would come all the way up there, pick it up and go, hello, hello, hello. Oh shit, we're out. You're out at sea, you're not getting any phone calls. So little trickery like that, you do it all the time. Another story, we used to get a newspaper. The radio officer we could listen to Armed Forces radio, and he'd type up a newspaper every day with the news, just basic news like scores from ball games, some of the news, world news, and it would be it was in a mimeograph. They had a mimeograph thing, so they would copy it and pass it out, 5 or 10 copies, and you'd get it. You'd read it. Well, there was one story that was that the Russians had launched a space ship, and the next day, the spaceship is going around the Earth, is orbiting the Earth. The next day, they found out it's a manned spaceship. The next day, it's heading towards the moon. And I'm believing this, because we were competing with them in the space at that time. And they landed on the moon. President Johnson congratulated Brezhnev, or whoever was Brezhnev, for their feat of landing on the moon and blah. So now we pull into port, and I'm expecting to see this in the news. I'm looking through it, going. So the guy had totally fooled us. Not everybody, but I believe that the Russians had beat us to the moon in 1968. So those are little things that happen to entertainment. Like I said, you had movies. You had once in a while you get a family gram from your family. they would send a message, your family could send you a note. You couldn't send one back because it would give away your position. So they would send a family-gram saying, oh, we just had a baby, or whatever. And so that was interesting. Nowadays they have email, so they can pick up email when you're out, and you can actually transmit it, because they transmit up to a satellite where it's just a burst, where it's it's not a long transmission, so it's pretty hard to pinpoint it. Yes. The only way you knew that is in most of your spot. If this was an engineering space, it would always be like this. But in the control room where the periscope is, at nighttime, you wanted it dark, because if you had to raise the scope to look out, you wanted your eyes adjusted, because if you wouldn't be able to see for many minutes until. So what they did is they rigged the control room for red. So the control room, this one area, was red at sundown, and they would turn it back at sunset. Sunset, light comes on, sunrise comes back to normal. That's the only way you would know it was day or night, if you went to that room to see. Of course, you could keep track of it on your watch, but you do lose a little bit of track of time. The days go fast, because you're on a routine. You stand 6 hours on, 12 hours off, 6 on, 12 off, 6 on, 12 off. And a lot of sleeping, a lot of reading, a lot of card playing, chess, read books, study. Opportune time to study, which I did. I studied a lot of, I studied English and electronics. Story. This interesting story. We were in the Vietnam waters, and we had a casualty with our bow planes. The bow planes control your depth. You have stern planes which control the angle of the ship underwater, and the bow planes control the depth. Well, one of the bow planes broke, so we had to surface. We were like 200 miles away from the Philippines. I don't know how many miles from Vietnam. Soon as we surfaced, our aircraft spotted us. They didn't know whether we were a Russian submarine or whatever, and they came down, swooped around, and said, "Hey, we're surrender. We're on your side." But here comes a swallow. Now, 200 miles from shore, the swallow sees the submarine all of a sudden pop out of the water and goes and lands right on the tip of the deck. And what the hell is a swallow doing out here 200 miles? Like, made a wrong turn. And he was sitting there, and somebody went out and got him and brought him and tried to feed him, but he died. But there was never any other animals that came on board. That was just something I remember. It was interesting that we would take the time to go get the swallow and bring it. We couldn't dive at that point because our bow plane. Well, we could, but it's safer to stay on the surface. So we turned and went. I don't know why we just didn't leave him on board, and just took us a couple days to get in there. So, but he didn't make it. So when you see a bird out in the middle of the ocean, it better be a seagoing bird, because we did, all my time in there, we didn't, and no one really got sick. We did some studies. The University of California, Davis did a study on how long lettuce will last. We took a whole bunch of lettuce and put it in the freezer. Some of it went in the freezer, some of it went in the reefer, and I can tell you lettuce lasts about 2 weeks. And I got sick of salad after 2 weeks. Food in the submarines is probably the best in the military. You have good cooks. They always buy the best food, and every Friday they used to have steak and lobster. I didn't like lobster too much. No one really got hurt any of the time that we we were out at sea. There are occasions when people get appendicitis or whatever, and what they have to do is evacuate him from that and send a helicopter over to pick him up and take him to another vessel. After I got out of the service, and a lot of my friends are coming back from Vietnam, they got drafted or whatever, I felt very lucky that I didn't have to spend time there getting shot at, getting maimed. One of my brother-in-laws, or not her, but my first marriage, had a brother-in-law that was from Vietnam. When he got out of Vietnam, he was being, mustered out at the Oakland Army base. Evidently there's an overpass that gets across there. He took all his belongings from the Army and just threw it over the side. He said, "I don't want to have anything to do with the U.S. government." And he did that for many years. He didn't sign up for VA benefits. He wasn't injured physically, but mentally he was, and it took him many years to recover from that war. I talked to him many times about what you're throwing away, the VA benefits. You can get, your VA. Everybody, I don't know if you've heard this. The VA people complain about the Veterans Administration. I don't have any complaints about them. They handle a lot of things well. They used to give you money to go to school, GI Bill. I was getting like $360 a month in the 60s to go to school. And buy a house. My first house was a VA loan. They had insurance. They took care of. I think they take care of the military people. You always hear horror stories, but I think it's far and few between. I think nowadays the military is a good place to serve. I would recommend it to anybody. It's an all volunteer service now. It's tough to get in. There are now women on submarines. That was fought. The submariners didn't think that the women could handle it. But they're on these missile boats now. But women in the military, it's kind of, you have to have separate quarters, and there's fraternization, so there's a lot of rules that have to be put into place. So when they first started putting women on ships, it was, and I experienced that was a real trying period. I'd recommend it to people. A good education, they got, if you get in the right thing. Think about it? Oh yeah, all the time. I'm a member of the Submarine Vets. We have a Christmas dinner we're going to on December 14th down in San Francisco. We meet once a month in Vallejo, and there's many chapters throughout the United States where the veterans get together, submarine vets, and basically their job is to perpetuate the memory of the submarine people that got killed, most of them being in World War II. We toll the bell for each submarine that was lost at some of our meetings. We have at the memorials, November 11th, Veterans Day. We were down in Vallejo at a monument. They have a torpedo, and gathered around that just right before the regular veterans celebration, if you want, lack of a better word, recognition. So thinking about it, I think about my father in World War II, and I think about a lot about the people that died during wars and how unlucky they were. Like in World War II, landing at Normandy Beach or Omaha Beach, and your ramp comes down and you had no chance of getting anywhere because they were just blown up, just machine gunned. And these are people that are 20, 21 years old. So I have the feeling that when I think about that is like how lucky I am that I didn't have to shorten my life because of that. Those are brave people that went through that. And so I think about that, do a lot of reading about history, World War II history, Vietnam, Korea. And you guys are getting, I'm not the one that got shot at, but that I just lucked out. And so those World War II veterans, that you want to pay attention to them, get their stories, and I think you guys are doing a fine job doing that. Spend the time, listen to their stories. I enjoy them too. Yes, there's a few that I served with, but most of them, no. They're just there was many other submarines, and you always got people on board ship or from Texas, from New York, so you've got a cross section of people that go back home. There's only about 4 or 5 that I know that I remember during my time. And we still communicate. We have one good friend in San Francisco that I didn't serve with on active duty. I served within the reserve, so we see them quite often. The rewards I received, well, first of all, being qualified in submarines is an accomplishment. It's like getting your wings on an aircraft, because you had to learn the whole submarine. You had to learn how to isolate a compartment. Matter of fact, it got to the point where you had sanitary tanks that where all your excrements go into, and then you would blow that water, pressurize and blow it out, and then it would fill up again, and you just keep, so there's a lot of crap going into the ocean, so to speak. Well, there is a way to blow. If you were to look at the piping system, the question they would ask is, how would you blow that sanitary through the whistle, the ship's whistle? Because the ship's whistle was run by high pressure air, and you could make the piping so that if you had to blow that sanitary tank, you could blow everything out through the ship's whistle, which was, you're never going to do it, but that's the training that you had to learn. So when you got your dolphins, that meant that everybody that had their dolphins had to go through that kind of stuff. The awards I got, well, got the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, the Vietnam Service Ribbon, I told you about that one already. Battle E, your ship is categorized as efficient in battle. Even though you didn't go in battle, you were ready for it. Everybody on board the ship gets that medal. The Armed Forces medal means anybody that goes in the service gets a National Defense Medal. That's what it was. And 2 other ones, a meritorious service, where you did something that you were recognized for. Like I was recognized for, I was a training officer for the my reserve unit, and I recognized me for training them in a high level degree. Be like a teacher getting an award for getting it organized and having a good class, because they were highly trained. So didn't have a chance to get the Medal of Honor or anything like that, but or Silver Star, Bronze Star, whatever. Those are mostly combat medals. The unit citation medals when your submarine did something special, on a mission. Can't talk about it, but you wear the medal as a part of that crew, that ship. Good conduct medal. You don't get in trouble for 4 years, they give you a good conduct medal. Officers don't wear that. The enlisted people do, but I had received one before I made officer. I can't wear it on my uniform now because it doesn't. Officers don't wear good conduct, but you always got to be good conduct with as an officer. So that's about it. Awards, yeah. Got a letter from President of the United States for when I retired, saying thanks for the service. It's kind of interesting. Although everyone in the world gets one of those that joins the military. They're retired. And now, after 31 years, I got medical coverage. I got commissary privileges. I can fly out of Travis Air Force Base on standby if I want to go somewhere for free. So putting the time in, they do have benefits. Of course, they're trying to take some of them away, with this austerity programs and with the, what do they call it, the sequester. They're trying to talk about taking commissary privileges away. We're saving about 30% on our groceries, shopping at commissaries, and they want to. It's costing the government too much money. So I don't know. I don't know about that, if that'll pass or not. Because the veterans do have a good lobby. They kind of watch over the government and make sure that they know their senators, talk to their senators and stuff. I do. I still have my uniforms, and I'm still trying to diet to get into them. I have my choker whites. I have my blue uniform. I brought my metal rack there. I have a picture of a submarine if you want to see it. I didn't bring my uniform. I would have wore it if I could fit into it. So it's a little tight up here. I just got so strong. As an officer, you have to submit a picture to the Bureau of Personnel. And so to get promoted as an officer, there's a board of officers that go to Washington, D.C., and they say there's a board of 20 people, and there's 400 people going up for promotion to a certain grade. The officers that are on the board, they have to be higher ranking than what the grade they're surveying. And they will get folders of all these people, and they will read through them and grade each one to say, and then you'd have to stand up and talk about, Marin, she's a great student, she's got book reports are on time, she gets A's and B's, so that's how officers in the Navy get promoted, is that you have a person talking about you that doesn't even know you, that is just reading your profile, and you have to have a picture in there. So if you're overweight, they look at that as a defect. So that's why there's in the military, you have to be physically fit. If you're overweight, they put you on program to get underweight. Then they throw all that food at you. And that's the USS Swordfish off the coast of Hawaii. And that was when I was in the reserves. That's at the Naval Reserve Center in Alameda, on board the USS Parchie, a World War II submarine. And that was a crew.
Should I show your?
Yeah, that was the medals that I earned, and the insignia at the top is the Dolphins, which means you're qualified in submarines. The bottom submarine is the deterrent patrol. You get a pin for going on that missile submarine and they have little spaces for every patrol you went on to. They would put a little star. A gold star would be 5 patrols. A silver would be 1 patrol. So you could fill them up, and then you'd add a 5. So you could have 30 patrols on there. Some people have made that many on those things. No. I think, I did like I said before, the Cold War ending caused them to draw down the reserves, and I missed that camaraderie. Going to the weekend drills once a month. Sometimes it was a pain. You say, "Oh God, I got to go to a drill this weekend. I could be watching football, or I could be playing golf." But once you got there and you did your job and you met the people that you served with, it was sort of a team effort. It was, I enjoyed that, and then they paid you. So it was like a second job. And I can tell you that I enjoyed my Navy career more than I did my civilian career. I think that the military is the most fair organization that I've ever been in. If you do your job, study, show up on time, you'll get to the level you should be. Whereas in industry or civilian world, it's not the same. If somebody doesn't like you and he's higher than you, then they won't, you don't get promotions. If you're not good looking, it's different. In the military, the people that, by and large, the people you see in command, the higher ups, got there because they know what they're doing. Very, very few people are there that don't know what they're doing. They might get there, but they don't stay there long. In civilian industry, people just get promoted and they shouldn't be there. I worked for the AT&T for 42 years, and they pay better than military, but oh yeah, when you're in the military during the 60s, you had to be squared away, which means you had to have a haircut, and you could wear civilian clothes, but you couldn't wear outlandish clothes to get off the base. You couldn't put a wig on and long hair and stuff. So now if you're trying to date somebody that's going to college like the University of Hawaii or whatever, you just didn't fit in, because I'm not saying everybody's like that, but there was, I think if you were trying to date a college student, you forget it. Although I think in the United States, or the continental United States, a little bit different. Hawaii was, less. Well, I don't know. San Diego, a lot of sailors had a lot of fun down there. San Diego. I made a mistake of putting in for Hawaii. I should have put in for San Diego. I got stationed. You had your choice of going to San Diego or going to Hawaii.